How do you keep Andrew Berry as GM and fire Kevin Stefanski?
Oh, that's a brother now.
Hey, let's analyze this from a macro standpoint.
Teams are hiring. The Falcons got their coach. The Titans hired. They're hiring all these coaches. What is taking so long? The Browns have been working on this for 3 weeks. What's going on?
They basically said, if you want to be our coach, you got to accept Andrew Berry and keep Jim Schwartz. Like, they're delusional. Like, they acted like they had real leverage.
I want to know how much longer the owner's going to watch this crap, because the fans have had it. We deserve better. You're worried more about your stadium than you are your football team. That's the perception, Jimmy.
Hell to the motherfucking nah. This is a ridiculous-ass organization. It's the worst in football. Them New York Jets right there.
They're delusional, JB. Haslam and Berry don't think there's nothing wrong with what they're doing. That's the worst component of it.
The Cleveland Browns are in absolute chaos right now. And we're not talking about the usual Cleveland chaos, the kind where they draft a quarterback who flames out or sign a free agent who never lives up to the hype. No, this is a different level of dysfunction. This is organizational malpractice happening in real time, and two prominent voices in sports media are absolutely torching the franchise for what might be the most embarrassing head coaching search in NFL history.
Is Andrew really running this, or is Jimmy using Andrew to do what he wants to do, the owner? That's a legitimate question. We've seen the meddling in the past. Is Andrew really doing this, or the Haslams have their favorites? But Chris, at one point last week, I text Chops and I go, Myles Garrett's running the coaching search because he wants Jim Schwartz.
Right. The Browns are reportedly using what they're calling a data-driven operation to find their next head coach. Sounds modern and sophisticated, right? Analytics, metrics, the Moneyball approach applied to football. Except here's the problem. They're requiring head coaching candidates, some of the most respected minds in football, to complete questionnaires, multi-part essays, personality tests, and additional homework. Yes, you read that correctly. Homework, like they're applying to be a graduate assistant at a Division III college, not leading an NFL franchise. And the results? Mike McDaniel and Jesse Minter, two highly sought-after coaching names, have reportedly withdrawn from consideration. They took one look at Cleveland's process and said, nah, we're good. That should tell you everything you need about where this organization stands right now. The reaction from Tony Rizzo and Shaun King on their shows was nothing short of explosive. These aren't casual observers throwing out hot takes for clicks. These are people who understand football, who've seen organizations succeed and fail, and who can recognize organizational incompetence when it's staring them in the face. And what they saw with the Browns, it made them furious.
I want to know how much longer the owner's going to watch this crap, because the fans have had it. We deserve better. You're worried more about your stadium than you are your football team. That's the perception, Jimmy.
Let's start with the fundamental problem here. Cleveland is treating this head coaching search like they're hiring for an entry-level corporate position. They're asking proven football minds to jump through hoops, to prove themselves through tests and essays, as if their resumes and track records don't speak for themselves. Mike McDaniel just took the Miami Dolphins to the playoffs multiple times with an innovative offensive system. Jesse Minter was the defensive coordinator for a Michigan team that won a national championship. These aren't unproven commodities. These are elite football minds who have other options.
Like, they acted like they had real leverage. And, by the way, we want you to take all these kindergarten and elementary and high school level tests just so we can, collect data and information.
That's the level of disrespect we're talking about. The Browns are treating A-list candidates like they need to prove they can read and write. It's insulting, and it's exactly the kind of tone-deaf move that defines why Cleveland has been a perpetual dumpster fire for 2 decades. But the testing and homework, that's just the surface-level absurdity. The real problem runs much deeper. According to the conversation, the Browns are essentially telling candidates that if they want the job, they have to keep Andrew Berry as general manager and retain Jim Schwartz as defensive coordinator. Think about that for a second. You're interviewing for one of the hardest jobs in professional sports, and before you even get the gig, you're being told who you have to work with and what your coaching staff will look like. This isn't how successful organizations operate. This is how desperate, dysfunctional organizations try to maintain control when they've completely lost the plot. And the criticism from JB and Shaun isn't just about the process, it's about what the process reveals about the organization's mentality. The Browns fire Kevin Stefanski after giving him every opportunity available, after other teams were clamoring to make him their head coach. Love him or hate him, Stefanski had proven he could succeed elsewhere and had the respect of the football world. But Cleveland's brass decided he wasn't the answer. Fine, that happens in the NFL. But then you turn around and tell his replacement that they can't choose their own staff, that they're stuck with the GM who built the roster that just failed? That's not a rebuild. That's rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic.
If I'm Myles Garrett, if you're Myles Garrett, you're not walking in here and say, what the fuck are we doing? I re-signed with you guys. You guys shitted on me. You've told me nothing. You've done nothing to make us better. We're not getting better. Then you told us we had a defense that was good because of me. Let's be honest. And now you're telling us the head coach has to keep the D coordinator. What head coach wants to go in and take a job?
This is the perspective that matters most. Myles Garrett is a generational defensive talent, a player who should be competing for championships, not sitting through another organizational reset. He re-signed with Cleveland based on promises about building a winner. Instead, he's watching the franchise fumble another coaching search while telling candidates they can't even pick their own defensive coordinator. How is that supposed to inspire confidence? How is that supposed to attract elite talent? The comparison to other organizations is stark. John Harbaugh just re-signed with Baltimore, but the contract negotiations took longer than expected because Harbaugh wanted full autonomy. He wanted the ability to make personnel decisions, to shape his coaching staff, to run the organization as he saw fit. And you know what? Baltimore gave it to him, because that's what successful franchises do. They empower their head coaches. They give them the tools and authority to succeed. Cleveland? They're doing the exact opposite. They're handicapping their next coach before he even walks through the door. They're creating a situation where failure is almost inevitable, and then they'll be able to point to the data and say, well, the numbers said this would work. It's organizational cowardice dressed up as analytics. The Deshaun Watson situation looms over everything like a toxic cloud. There's no getting around it. Cleveland invested an historic amount of money in draft capital into a quarterback who hasn't performed at even a replacement level since arriving. Whether it's injuries, rust, or simply not being the same player, Watson has been a disaster for this franchise. And now they're asking coaches to come in and fix that situation while also dealing with all these organizational restrictions? No wonder Mike McDaniel and Jesse Minter walked away. But here's where it gets even more frustrating for Browns fans. This is completely preventable. This isn't bad luck. This isn't a string of unfortunate injuries or a controversial referee call that changed a season. This is self-inflicted organizational dysfunction. This is ownership and management making decision after decision that alienates candidates, frustrates players, and makes the franchise a punchline across the league. The testing component deserves more scrutiny because it reveals something insidious about how modern organizations can hide behind data to avoid accountability. When you make every decision based on tests, questionnaires, and personality profiles, you create a buffer between yourself and responsibility. If the hire doesn't work out, you can always say, well, the data supported the decision. You never have to admit that you made a mistake in judgment. You never have to trust your instincts or take ownership of your choices. Football isn't played in a laboratory. It's not a computer simulation where you can input variables and predict outcomes with certainty. It's a game of instincts, relationships, leadership, and adaptability. The best coaches aren't necessarily the ones who test the highest on some personality inventory. They're the ones who can command a locker room, adjust on the fly, and get the most out of their players. None of that shows up on a Scantron form.
Fail-proof, because nobody has to ever get blamed when you approach things like this.
Right.
Well, this is what the data said. We didn't make a bad decision. The data's never wrong.
That's the entire game. The Browns front office has created a system where they can never be held accountable. If the next coach fails, they'll point to the tests and say the candidate met all the criteria. They'll point to the retained staff and say they gave him the best possible foundation. They'll point to the Watson contract and say it was too much to overcome. At no point will ownership or management look in the mirror and admit that they're the common denominator in 2 decades of failure. Cleveland fans deserve better than this. They're some of the most passionate, loyal supporters in all of sports. They've stuck with this franchise through decades of misery, through 131 records, through heartbreak after heartbreak. And this is how the organization repays them? With a coaching search that's become a national embarrassment? With a process so backwards that legitimate candidates are removing themselves from consideration? The comparison to the Jets is apt. Both franchises have become case studies in dysfunction, examples of how not to run an NFL organization. But at least the Jets' problems stem from an owner who's too involved, who makes emotional decisions based on his gut feelings. That's wrong, but it's at least understandable on some human level. The Browns' approach is worse because it's calculated dysfunction. They've thought through this process and decided that insulting candidates with homework assignments and stripping away their autonomy is the path forward.
We don't kick field goal stuff. It's maybe the dumbest evolution in football of all the things that evolved over the last 25 years is the fact that these guys have convinced themselves that points are insignificant.
This also connects to a broader point about how analytics and data can be misused in football. Yes, data is valuable. Yes, numbers can inform decisions, but when you let data override common sense, when you use analytics as a shield against accountability rather than a tool for improvement, you end up with situations like the Browns' coaching search. You end up with teams going for it on 4th down in situations that make no sense. You end up with organizational paralysis disguised as sophistication. The solution here is obvious, even if it's painful. Fire Andrew Berry. Start over with a clean slate. Let your next head coach bring in his own GM, build his own staff, and implement his own vision. That's how you attract elite candidates. That's how you signal to the football world that you're serious about turning this franchise around. But that would require ownership to admit they made mistakes, and based on everything we've seen, that's not something they're willing to do. So what happens next? Cleveland will eventually hire someone. They'll hold a press conference and talk about how thorough their process was, how much data they collected, and how confident they are in their choice. And then that coach will step into an impossible situation, hamstrung by organizational restrictions and saddled with a roster that includes both Deshaun Watson's albatross contract and possibly a rookie quarterback. The coach will probably last 2 or 3 years before getting fired, and then we'll do this all over again. Because that's what the Browns do. They repeat the same mistakes while convincing themselves that this time it's different, that this time the data will save them, that this time they figured it out. But you can't solve organizational dysfunction with personality tests and essays. The Browns' coaching search is more than just an embarrassment. It's a masterclass in how not to run a professional sports franchise. And until ownership and management fundamentally change their approach, until they're willing to admit their mistakes and give their next coach real authority and autonomy, Cleveland will remain exactly what they've been for the past 2 decades, the NFL's most reliably dysfunctional organization.